And today I have a special guest, Eddie Smith. Eddie Smith with Childhelp. All right, so for those who don't know, what is Childhelp?
So Childhelp is one of the nation's largest and oldest nonprofits dedicated to helping to end child abuse and neglect.
Welcome to another episode of The Den. I'm Eric Whitener, broker, owner of the Knoxville Real Estate Group, and this is our podcast where we talk about the greater Knoxville community, real estate and organizations, just anything Knoxville related, East Tennessee related at that. And today I have a special guest, Eddie Smith. Eddie Smith with Childhelp. Hello.
How are you?
I'm great.
Thank you so much for having me today, Eric.
Thank you for being on the show. Today will be a little bit different. I think you may be the first nonprofit organization, I think, that we've actually had on the show. We've talked a lot about nonprofits. We've had people like Val Privet and Jeanette Bergen, who are both big, very involved in a lot of nonprofits, and Childhelp being one of those. So I'm glad to have you here so we can talk about some really important topics.
Well, thank you. And a lot of the viewers may be going, why do you have this nonprofit on first? And as we go through, I think they'll see the correlation between Childhelp and what we do and then the greater real estate market here in the greater Knoxville area that really does come in to support the Knox Fox being one of those.
Wow, definitely. Awesome. So first of all, let's just, as we get started, what is your role at Childhelp?
So I am the Director of Organizational Advancement, which really just kind of, I oversee all of our local fundraising here in the greater Knoxville area, all of the grant writing for us here in Tennessee, social media, public relations. So I handle a lot of the things around just the kind of the public face for Childhelp here in Tennessee.
Cool. You do more than just work with Childhelp, though, as well.
I do. I also serve on the State Charter School Commission. I serve on the Knoxville, the Knoxville-Knox County Election Commission, and just rolled off of the Knoxville-Knox County Planning Commission. So
definitely involved.
Definitely involved.
Awesome. All right. So for those who don't know, what is Childhelp?
So Childhelp is one of the nation's largest and oldest nonprofits dedicated to helping to end child abuse and neglect. We began, believe it or not, 65 years ago when two Hollywood actresses met on the Ozzie and Harriet show, way before mine and your time, but they met. And what's unique about that is one was from, Yvonne was from Nebraska, but Sarah was actually from Knoxville. Had left Knoxville, gone to Hollywood. They were the girlfriends on the Ozzie and Harriet show, became good friends, and they were on a tour over in Japan, a USO tour, when a typhoon hit. And being like all good Americans, they ignored the government directive and went out in the middle of the typhoon. But when they did, they found 11 orphan children that were cold, wet, and dirty in an alley. Brought those kids into their hotel room, and really it came to find out that because they were half American and half Japanese, they were shunned at the time by the culture, so they had nowhere to go. So Sarah and Yvonne, actually with their friends from Hollywood, began an orphanage. They were known as International Orphans at that time, is what the organization was called. Ended up with, I believe, 5 or 6 orphanages across the country of Japan. And then a few years later, the war in Vietnam is raging, same problem, and they were actually asked by Congress to step in and help in Vietnam. We're actually coming up on the 50th anniversary of Operation Baby Lift, which Sarah and Yvonne helped to coordinate, which flew children, when the fall of Saigon was happening, they flew children all over the world into waiting arms of adoptive parents, so that those children would not be in harm's way and would find forever homes. Fast forward to the 1970s, then First Lady of California, Nancy Reagan, approached Sarah and Yvonne and said, "We need your help here in America with America's best kept secret of child abuse and neglect." And thus began Childhelp as we know it today. About almost 30 years ago, they opened the Advocacy Center in Knoxville. A few years later, our foster family agency opened. And then in the last 5 years is when we've really seen some significant growth of what we're able to do in serving the greater, not only Knoxville, Knox County, but also the 16 counties that kind of surround Knoxville.
Man, so that's just the story itself, like how this organization has become, like what it is today, is pretty wild, and it's really kind of cool to think that it truly has roots here in Knoxville.
It does. As a matter of fact, our advocacy center sits in the backyard of the house that Sarah grew up in. So it's something that, it wasn't planned. When we moved, no one knew that that was actually Sarah's childhood home till we actually got in the building, and then we discovered that that was actually her childhood home that she had grown up in right there off of Kingston Pike. So our advocacy center was built literally in the backyard that she would have grown up in.
That's wild. That is wild. Okay, so we understand now that Childhelp is about helping children who are dealing with abuse and other things. In what ways do you help them?
So if you think about child abuse and neglect, it really comes down to a continuum of care. There's three buckets within that. There's the prevention, there's the intervention, and there's the treatment. So we'll talk about those kind of in, not going exactly in order because I want to be able to come back to the things we're doing on the prevention side. But for a lot of times, it's when the intervention happens. Abuse, neglect has occurred. Law enforcement, DCS, has started the investigation. Well, what they're able to do is they're able to bring that child to our child advocacy center, where we have specially trained forensic interviewers who can sit down with a kid, much like what we're doing here, have a conversation. It's video and audio recorded, and that is admissible in court for that child's testimony if the judge so deems it necessary. So that child is able to, in a comfortable setting, be able to share what happened, who did it. There have been instances when our forensic interviewers have done interviews that have lasted 4 and 5 hours, that the child is disclosing things that has helped law enforcement call in subpoenas during that child's interview for things to go be collected as evidence to help prosecute crimes against children. So before we existed, that child would have to tell their story to the police, be put in a room much like a common criminal, the metal table, all that. Not really child friendly, but that's just the way it was. Then they would be taken across town to the DA's office where they'd have to tell their story again, might have to go to Children's Hospital where they would have to tell their story a third time. Then they would have to tell the judge a fourth time. So it's a lot of times of that child having to relive the trauma. But with Childhelp and our ability to do the forensic interviews, we're actually able to allow that child to tell their story once and then move on to healing so that they don't have to relive it over and over again.
Well, not to mention that whole process, of before. That almost sounds scary. Like you're already dealing with something scary, and to like go get interviewed by a police officer and then have to go from spot to spot. If I would imagine for a child, even just that process is tough.
And we know it now as what's called an ACE score, Adverse Childhood Experience. So every time that child has to relive that story, it's adding to their ACE score. You hit a certain score, and it's kind of a rudimentary, method of how much is this child at risk of using substances, dropping out of school. It really starts affecting their mental health down the road. So when through the advocacy center and some of the work that we've been able to do with our partners, we're actually reducing that child's ACE score so that they're able to heal faster and live out a healthy, normal life.
That's interesting. So to be able to measure the amount of trauma to base it on, okay, if they hit this certain level, their odds of, number one, not living to their fullest, number two, possibly going the complete opposite route and doing things they shouldn't do as an adult. It's pretty wild. I didn't realize we had a score for that, but
it's called the Adverse Childhood Experience. It's an ACE score, and they use it in school systems now. Mental health providers use it. We use it. So it's really just kind of a measure to know how many different triggers. And things as simple as, the loss of a family member can actually add to your ACE score. But it's how many of those do you have in a close sequence that really can trigger. It can slow you down educationally. It can mess with your mental health, and all those things lead to trying to self-medicate. So that's really what it turns into, is people trying to self-soothe, and they turn to drugs and substances.
Wow. So what you're doing today to help people, and I don't want to gloss over the fact, normally when we're talking to people, we're talking about how great Knoxville is. And Knoxville is a great place. I love living here. but I think it's also good to talk about like Knox. Just because you live in Knoxville doesn't mean everything's rosy.
That is correct.
We deal with the same issues that I think every community in America deals with, for everything from homelessness to child abuse, drug use. There are we do have those things here. I mean, it'd be silly to think we don't. So having one thing I've always loved about our area are how many nonprofits, how many opportunities there are for people to get involved to help, and that there's these things to there are these places that maybe not every place has that will lift people up. It's pretty awesome. Um, s- since I know you guys have stats since Child Help has been in place, or if even if you could say in like the last year, how many people? Because one of the goals is to when someone's committing child abuse is to basically not let them continue.
Well, and let's define, so child abuse can actually be physical abuse, it can be sexual abuse, but it's also classified as witness to gun violence, witness to violence, drug exposure. All of that falls under the child abuse umbrella, and that's what we see. As a matter of fact, I was talking with Vonda McGill, our director of the CAC in our clinical program, and we've seen about a 30% increase in children who are being seen through our CIPIT team, which is the Child Protective Investigative Team, that is comprised of Childhelp, the DA's office, both KPD, KCSO, the Department of Children's Services, a medical doctor, and a mental health program through Childhelp, and they review every case out of Knox County every single. Matter of fact, it's this past Wednesday, which we're recording this on Wednesday morning. That team is meeting right this minute to look over about 80 some odd cases, and about 30% of those will be exposure to drugs.
Okay.
So we're seeing still just an explosion in our community of people who are still using opioids, illegal drugs, and kids that are exposed to those, and it's resulting in abuse and neglect. And again, child neglect can be things as simple as children not getting fed. It could be educational neglect where they're not being taken to school. We've got school starting back on Thursday. It's important for teachers and family to see, hey, if the kid next door is not going to school, we know they're not homeschooled, speak up and say something, because the sooner you get that child help, the less trauma that child will have to unpack down the road.
Wow. Wow. Awesome. So as you're talking about all this stuff that happens at Child Help, it seems like a lot. There's a lot going on there.
There is.
That how does how does that operation run? I mean, like, it sounds massive, but I've been to your facility. Can you tell people a little bit just like maybe how it runs?
So a child and family comes in for this for a forensic interview. The first person that greets them, obviously, is our forensic services coordinator, just to help get them checked in. And then our victim advocate comes in just to kind of walk the family through and the child through. Hey, here's what you're going to, here's what you can expect. We've got some pamphlets and things that they get just so they can understand the process. Because a lot of times just understanding the investigative side of things can be scary. But if they know how the investigation is going to work, here are the resources that you have that are available to you. And then we don't do it all. Then, they leave us and they go into court, that's where we've got a lot. You mentioned a lot of nonprofits in the Knoxville area. No one nonprofit does it all. We all work together, and that's what's probably more unique about Knoxville and Knox County and East Tennessee than some of the other areas. And having served in public office, I got to see a lot of other communities around the state, but also around the country. And I think Knoxville is very unique in the collaboration that's taking place within the nonprofit sector. So they leave us and they go into the courts. Well, that's where CASA picks up, which is a court-appointed victim advocate. So that is where they're in there with them during court, because our forensic interviewers have to be there to testify. So we can't really be there for the kid. That's where CASA steps in. So we've got a great partnership with CASA here in East Tennessee. And then we've got great partnerships with other nonprofits like Helen Ross McNabb. Helen Ross McNabb is great on substance abuse issues. And if we've got a kid that's got that, we refer to Helen Ross McNabb. We're not experts in substance abuse. We're experts in child abuse and neglect. But similarly, if Helen Ross McNabb gets a kid that has complex trauma, that's not what they're set up for. So they refer to us because that's what we do. So again, just a great partnership, even with Helen Ross McNabb, where we're not trying to dilute our community's resources. We're trying to maximize the resources we have in this community to better serve kids.
That's awesome. It's great to hear about these kind of partnerships and how nonprofits can work together. And I like the idea of the using where everybody specializes, right? Like, because it's hard to be everything to everyone, and then you end up not really good at any one of those things. But this way, you're really kind of giving each child the best of what they need.
Yes.
That's pretty awesome. As far as, a child's been through, whatever traumatic event in their life, do you have any track of, hey, we've helped this many, children, this is, outcomes that have happened from that?
Yeah, and that's where, again, I talked about the three buckets: prevention. We just talked about intervention, but then we go into the treatment phase. So let's look at the three things that we have within the treatment realm. One of those being our therapeutic foster family agency. So we go through the process. A child might need to be removed from their family, and there's no relatives to take care of them. They can be placed into foster care. We typically deal with level 2 children. These are kids that are higher than a level 1, which would be just like simplex trauma. While all trauma is bad for kids, it's more simple trauma. This is, trauma that has occurred over years and in multiple ways. So it's a little bit harder. And we provide therapeutic foster care. So all of our foster family agencies are actually trained in a therapeutic model for being able to care for the kids in their care. And we've seen some great success. 97% of all of the children discharged from our therapeutic foster care program were successful discharges. Now that 3%, while the state classifies it as a negative discharge, I don't view it that way, because what that child actually needed was a higher level of care than what we could provide. So we help them get into that higher level of care. When they've completed that, they will actually step back down to us. So that child is still with us. They just needed a higher level of care than what we could provide. But the state still views that as a negative discharge. So, every child that comes to us is still getting help at whatever it is level that they need that help at. This past year, I want to say we saw 14 adoptions and 18 children reunified with their family. So these are family members that maybe there was some abuse or neglect that happened, but we were able to get some treatment into the home. So not only were we treating the kid, we were also, there was a parenting plan put together. That parent had to meet certain benchmarks, and we walked with them through that entire journey to help them heal so that they can take their kid back into their home.
That's that's really cool. The idea of, children, no matter what their parents do, always want their parent, right? Like, we know that, right? Even if they were abusive, they still love their parents. Mm-hmm. So to be able to help those people, fix what they need to fix in their lives, to be able to reunite. That's probably one of the better outcomes I would think that could be possible, is to be able to kind of heal the whole family in a way.
Yes, and through in that treatment realm, while we have the therapeutic foster care agency, we also have our mental health clinic, and we have something called PCIT, which is Parent-Child Interactive Therapy. So, it's about a 16-week course for children up to about the age of 7. But what happens is the parent actually comes in with the child for therapy. The parent wears an earpiece. Our therapist is in another room observing, but then they're coaching the parent through discipline, how to deal with stubborn children, maybe outbursts and behaviors. So rather than it resorting to beatings or, taking food away or things like that, we're actually teaching parents and coaching them on how to parent and to diffuse a situation so that it doesn't turn into those things. So just one other tool that we have within our mental health program and our treatment that is able to help a lot of families in our therapeutic foster care.
Man, that's pretty well. So I did not realize you guys like went to that level to where you're, I would just figured it was just the focus was on the child in that situation, but you're looking at more of a holistic kind of approach to that family model. Again, I mean, obviously you would want, I would say the outcome would be always better if the child went back home, as long as home was a better place.
Right.
So, that sounds like a much larger impact on the community when you're impacting, you're not just impacting one person, you're impacting a whole family.
Yes, and while we've got the mental health and while we have the foster family agency, one of the things that we recognized about 2 years ago is there was really no middle path for children. So it was either stay with the parents or go into foster care. Well, that's where we went to Governor Lee, met with him, met with the Department of Children's Services, and came up with a new model that we're actually running, working to get it evidence-based, which is our relative care program. And this is where, so when DCS needs to remove a child, the first question they ask is there a relative that could care for this child? Well, a lot of times, yes, there is, but that relative may be a grandparent that's living on a fixed income that doesn't have the disposable income to care for that child. Right. So under the old system, what would happen is that grandparent, at the exact moment DCS called, had to make a decision. Do you want to become a level 1 foster home, or does this child just go into foster care? Or do you want to care for them on your own? So if they chose, hey, we don't want DCS involved, we want to be able to help them, but then they find out that child has more needs than what they can afford, there was no path to get them help. That child then had to be removed from the relative's home and put into foster care. And we know from data that every time you move a child placement, that is a third of a GPA point loss. So if you've got a kid who parents, maybe they were on drugs, need to be removed from that, put with grandparents, and then move to foster care. If you had a perfect 4.0 student, they're now at a 3.0. So if you think about it, that's what it actually affects, because that's 3 placement changes. And in foster care, the average is about 5 placement changes. So, before we actually find permanency for that child. With Childhelp, we've reduced that down to about 3. But then we've also got some additional support through our relative care program that we're running. We've got almost 350 kids in that program right this minute, from Morristown to the Kentucky state line to Crossville to Monroe County, just north of Chattanooga. It is a large program covering 16 counties. And what we've seen through that is we've been able to stabilize the family, because now when that family takes on that care of that child, we're able to come in and provide food assistance, rental and housing assistance so that they can provide a safe home, educational support. We're able to hire tutors to help that child get caught back up and be back on track. And we actually saw a great increase this past year. Everybody's heard about the 3rd and 4th grade reading retention policy in the state. We were able to help all of our kids, and not a single one of them was actually retained in either 3rd or 4th grade because of what we were able to do in providing those resources to help the kids and the families.
Man, that's awesome. The ability to, I mean, think about all the lost potential that people, using maybe more traditional methods, that loss of potential that they had because of just running through a system, versus what you guys are doing, where you see the points in the process that need repair, and you've streamlined it as much to prevent as much of that loss of potential, if anything, and maybe even gaining some potential because they're, not to say that the experience is rosy. These children have gone through something, and they're going through this system. Even Childhelp is still a system, but they're going through this system to get better. Um, I just think it's amazing. It's crazy to think that you guys have got it broke down to where you're like, hey, so every time they move, it affects their GPA. I mean, I don't know how many children had to be studied to try to figure that out, but I'm gonna guess it's quite a few.
So we know that there's about 500,000 children in foster care in this country. And again, it's over years of looking at it. But what we know is 50% of kids will actually drop out of high school. Of those that actually graduate high school, only 8% will actually obtain a bachelor's degree. So you think about what 8% of 500,000 is. That's about 45,000 kids out of 500,000 will actually get a college degree. And when you think about just the long-term effect of what that does, that keeps those individuals and the families that they will have in that poverty cycle. And in poverty, we do see a higher risk of a neglect, be it educational neglect, food neglect, also classified as child abuse, but it's more neglect than it is physical abuse or sexual abuse. And this goes across all socioeconomics. I don't want anyone to think that only the poor are dealing with this. We've had families out of Farragut that had the children have suffered sexual abuse over 10 and 12 years that the other parent knew nothing about. And the one parent was using it as a punishment and basically threatened and said, if you ever say anything, they'll take you away from us. So the kid grew up with that kind of mentality of like, if I say anything, I won't have a family anymore. So it's used as a manipulative tool by people. So it cuts across all socioeconomic, cuts across all racial lines. I mean, there's no one thing to say it's one area is more prone to this than the other because it happens across the spectrum.
So would you classify? I mean, is the origin of a lot of this mental health to begin with, or is it just in some cases a a lack of not understanding? Or I mean, I understand physical abuse, sexual abuse. Well, sexual abuse is what it is, but I'm talking about like neglect or those kind of things. Is it Does it mostly stem from mental health?
I don't want to say it mostly stems from mental health. I mean, we do see mental health play a role in that. But again, it depends on the type of abuse. Again, if we're talking about neglect, that's more of a socioeconomic, probably if you trace it back, it was lack of education, which led to lack of a good paying job. So therefore there's, and that's probably generational. When we usually find that, we find that it's a generational problem. When you get into sexual abuse, hurt people hurt people. So if you can really drill down onto the perpetrator, you probably can find that they probably were hurt somewhere in their past, and that caused a mental health. I go back to the ACE score.
Yeah.
That might be they might have had a high ACE score, which resulted in just unfortunately what we would term as mental health illness, and then they were perpetrating on someone else, a child or a family member. And when you look at the data, here in Knox County, and this comes from Sharm Allen, our DA, 90% of all kids know their abusers. 70% are family members.
Wow.
In our community. So it's happening in the family. We talk about stranger danger, with kids, and while that does need to be talked about, that's not really, the reality of what most of the kids are going to experience. Again, 90% of the kids know their abusers. 70% are family members.
That's a crazy stat. It really is. That's wild. So when a child is in these situations, how do they get to you? Like what's that trigger that makes everything start?
So
happen?
usually, and that's why I wanted to come back to the prevention piece last, because it's where we're now working heavily to try and influence and stop things earlier. But the way they get to us on the front end is somewhere along the line, someone has made a report to either law enforcement or DCS through the child abuse hotline. They've reported something, so DCS law enforcement starts the investigation, and then they bring them to us. So that's how it starts, and then there's that continuum of care where we might dip out for a little while because it's going through the court process. Again, a kid that goes through our forensic interview might not be placed with our foster family agency. They might be placed with another therapeutic foster family agency because we're on the front end involved in the court battle. So we see kids from, again, our foster family agency serves 16 counties in East Tennessee. So it works, so that it's not we are doing the forensic interviews to take the kids so that we can have them in our foster care. We're trying our best to make sure that we help that child where they're at get the help that they need. But then on the front end, what we're doing is a new program that we've launched called Speak Up, Be Safe. This is Childhelp's evidence-based curriculum that is actually the only curriculum on the market evidence-based for pre-K through 12th grade. So it's age appropriate, and the lessons are taught from pre-K all the way to 12th grade so that students can recognize what does abuse look like. What does neglect look like? How can you find a safe adult to speak up? Because it may be that the abuser is a law enforcement officer or a teacher. So how can you recognize the safe adult to go to and be able to speak up? And what we've seen through that over the last 2 years, we've been able to, and we've got this grant funded, so it's been no cost to some of our nonprofit partners like Emerald Youth Foundation. Every child at Emerald Youth has been trained in Speak Up, Be Safe for the last 2 summers. The Boys and Girls Clubs, the YMCAs, City of Knoxville Parks and Recreation just came on this year, and we've been teaching it to all of the kids in the City of Knoxville Park and Rec over the summer. We've trained almost 5,000 kids in Knoxville over the last year, and we talked about all the programs combined. We served over 7,000 kids from July 1st of last year till June 30th of this year. That's when our fiscal year runs. It was a little over 7,000 kids that were served right here in our community.
Wow. So with that being said, are you already seeing like actual benefit from that? Like, or are you seeing changes?
We are. As a matter of fact, over the summer, our Speak Up, Be Safe trainers have actually received about 9 disclosures from children of things that are happening. Things as simple as, well, Dad, they said beat me. Turns out just discipline. That's easy to say that's not abuse, that's just discipline. But then we've seen things on the more severe side where there was a protective order. A parent came into the home, was abusing the kids, and then leaving before anybody could find out about it. So that child spoke up, and we were able to give that to the investigators who found out that she was violating her parole and the protective order, and that person is now back in jail.
Wow. Okay, so you said something that just made my head kind of like start thinking about it. There was a period of time, I don't know if it really happens anymore, but where a kid would be like, "Hey, you can't spank me. I'll call child services or whatever." You guys actually, if you get something like that, you actually have the ability to like define like, "Hey, after hearing these stories, this isn't like." That's not abuse.
Yes, all of our people are trained. Again, if anybody suspects that it is more than just discipline, because again, like one of the kids that came up, it was I think a kindergartner or first grader, said that my dad beat me. Well, as they were able to talk to him, he swatted me on the hiney with his hand, but the kid thought that was abuse. Those are the ones you can rule out very quickly.
Yeah.
It's the ones where you may notice things where the kid is withdrawing. There may be some random marks and bruises appearing on the body. That's when you need to be cognizant of that. And the one thing that everybody in the state needs to remember is we are all mandatory reporters. So if you see something, you are required by law to report it. Let the investigators go through the process of figuring out is this or not. They've all been been trained in that. And if it's a borderline issue, our Speak Up, Be Safe trainers will actually file a report. They will meet with the school and then file the report so that the school's aware of it. So again, it's let the professionals do what they've been trained to do. You just do your due diligence of making sure that if you see something that's out of the ordinary, report it.
Wow. I didn't know that we had a law in the books like that either.
Yes.
That's pretty wild. Um, so obviously, Childhelp is a nonprofit organization. Um, two questions I have for you. One is, if somebody were to want to, do you take volunteers?
We do. As a matter of fact, we've got a great volunteer opportunity. And this is where I mentioned earlier about the Knoxville Area Association of Realtors. They are a huge partner with us. They volunteer all throughout the year on different things, whether it's doing landscaping days at our advocacy center, just so that, you kind of want to keep it fresh and trimmed up. We also have where you can volunteer at our concession and beer stand at Neyland Stadium during football season. Now, it's about a 9-hour day, but that alone will help us raise about $60,000 to $70,000 for Childhelp. That pays for one therapist for us, because what happens is Airmark donates 10% of all of the sales back to us, and they give 100% of the tips back to us. So it adds up quite a bit, and we've got the beer stand right at the top of the ramp of Gate 10. So if you're coming up the big ramp on the south side of the stadium, that first end you come to, and we're waiting to see. They actually tore our concession stand down because there are some renovations that are going on. So we're either going to be taking over the Truly tailgate or a new marketplace on the that's been built out on the kind of the northwest corner of the stadium. So we'll know that in the next week or so.
Okay, so definitely got some volunteer options to help out the organization. As far as fundraising, those are also fundraising opportunities, but you guys do other methods of fundraising.
We do. We have the easiest way if you want to come learn more is, and it'll be in February next year, is our Helping Kids Fight Abuse Community Luncheon. It's where we kind of really just introduce who Childhelp is and ways that people can get involved. We have an entire volunteer army called Child Helpers that really just go in, and they can do things as simple as writing thank you cards to law enforcement, the DA's office, DCS, because again, those are some of our critical partners, and it's a thankless job a lot of times for them. So we really just try and do it so that we can love on our partners, all the way up to public relations, going and learning more about it so you can do podcasts and talk about Childhelp around the community. And again, we just opened our third office here in East Tennessee up in the Morristown area. So we have 2 offices in Knoxville and 1 in Morristown now. So again, it's just a large footprint area. So if you're listening and you're like, hey, I live up in the Morristown or I live up in Scott County, reach out to us, because we need help getting into those communities, because the more people can learn about what's out there and available, the more help we can get to kids.
Awesome. As far as so one, I'm gonna go back to a little bit on the fundraising side. So I've been to several of these, but you guys do a big annual event.
We do.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes.
Because I know you're big. You're definitely on the stage when it comes to that one.
I am on the stage. That is our annual gala. It's called Les Trois Chefs, which is French for the 3 chefs. We usually have about 3 chefs that are cooking the food. It's a 4-course dinner. Then there's 3 past appetizers during the cocktail hour. Everything is fully covered. Tickets are about $350 a person, or companies can sponsor a table of 10 for $3,500. So it's not a huge commitment on companies' behalf, but it helps us raise about $300,000 a year just to fund our ongoing operations, to keep things going for kids in our community and to start new programs. Right this minute in our mental health, we're focused on that this year. We've got 86 kids on a wait list. We've got 10 therapists right this minute that are serving about 220 kids a week. And we've got 86 kids on a wait list waiting to get in to see a therapist. We really need to hire, at a minimum, 2 more therapists right this second.
Okay, so it's wild to think that there are currently children on a wait list to get help. how long do you think it will take for you guys to be able to add? Like, what do you need to be able to add these two so that these kids are no longer on a wait list?
So we right off the bat, just to add two more therapists, we've got to find about $120,000 to be able.
In addition to your normal budget.
Yes, we've got to find fundraising for an additional 120,000, and the easiest way that people can do that, and I know it seems small, but if they want to go to childhelp.org/TN, so for the state of Tennessee, TN, donate. That's the specific page for our Tennessee fundraising through our national organization, and you can become what we call a Champions for Children. It's 51 cents a day, adds up to about $15.30 a month. Getting grassroots efforts of helping like that, where you just put it on your credit card, and and people have asked me, why 51 cents a day? Well, it really harkens back to the fact that we lose 5 children every single day in America to child abuse and neglect. So we did the 5-1 at 51 cents, and really, we've seen great growth out of that. We just this last year we started it. We already have, I think it's about 100 recurring donors donating to that. You can do the math. If you're doing $15.30 a month, at 100, that's only $1,500 a month. So $15,000 a year.
Well, I've helped in a lot of nonprofits. I've supported them in a multitude of ways. Excuse me. The one thing that is always kind of I found interesting is I think a lot of people feel like they have to give big, and while big gifts are welcomed, I mean you're not going to turn any.
I will never turn a big gift down.
But the reality is if everybody, even if thousands of people just gave $5,
mm-hmm.
that makes a huge impact, and so to think that you can't make a difference, you can by just giving a little bit, what you can do to help somebody else. And what's amazing when you start doing that is the feeling you get. I've always, like I said, I'm not necessarily the person always doing it, but I like to support the person who is doing it, to be able to make a difference so that person can go out and impact lives. Volunteers, if you're even in a volunteer, like you guys have to hire professionals to do the job, right? But even if you're a volunteer at a nonprofit, you're normally taking time away from something else you could be doing. So to be able to fund that so that that's successful, it just works. So if people would just, if you're listening to this, just think about it. There's an opportunity here where you can give a minimal amount and impact a lot of children in a very positive way, which ultimately impacts our whole area, because these children now are tomorrow's adults, and if you're able to knock them out of that loop, that cyclical, loop of creating, keeping that going, the hurt, the raising more children that are going to have these issues. If you can break that cycle, then that just helps our whole community be exactly what it is. It's a great community.
We have a saying kind of in the philanthropy world that, large gifts, again, we love them, but those are usually one-time things.
Yeah.
The people who are giving that $15.30 a month, I mean, think about it this way. What we're asking you to give up is 2 trips to Starbucks a month to fund that. Just skip Starbucks 2 days out of the entire month to be able to fund $15.30. But that $15.30 added with your friends and your neighbors and everybody adding together makes for real change. Again, when I started at Childhelp in 2019, we were serving about 1,300 kids a year. We served 7,000 kids this last year. So that's the kind of growth that we've been able to have and the impact we're able to, because we've got so many people wrapping around and supporting in a way that they can. When I do those fundraising events, I talk about, everybody woke up this morning with one of 3 things. You woke up with either time, volunteer. You woke up with a talent. How can you use that talent to serve Childhelp? Or you have some treasure. And that treasure is a financial donation. So how are you going to use one of those 3 things today to help benefit children in our community?
That's I think that's something a lot of people don't think about. We all have a way we can make an impact. And that is what I do like about Knoxville. So many people do. But I mean, we have a growing population. I'm sure you've probably even seen over the last couple of years how that's probably impacted y'all's organization as well. As all these people that have moved in has created, I mean, more people to serve. But anyways, the idea of doing a little bit can help a lot, and we'll go ahead and post down on this blog down below. There will be a link to Childhelp where people can look into that, and they can either reach out to see how they can help, or maybe sign up to do the monthly giving. I think those are all great ways to help. I would really like to see at the end of the day there not be a wait list of children looking to get help.
And we had that wait list down to zero about 18 months ago. That's when the city and county funded through the ARPA funds some mental health therapy. Both the county mayor and city mayor have continued that funding. But as we've seen a rise in post-COVID, just the children that are needing to be served, our wait list has gone from zero back up to about 86. So it's creeping back up close to where we were when we only had one therapist with 100 kids on a wait list. Yeah. We were able to get that down as we brought on more therapists and thought we were going to be able to get ahead of this, and it's just snowballing faster. I'll put my planning commission hat on that I just rolled off of. You talked about the growth of our area. What I think everybody needs to understand is the greater Knoxville metropolitan area, which is Knox plus the 8 counties that surround us, is expected to grow by about 250,000 people up through about 2035. So over the next 12 years, we're going to be adding a lot of people to our region. Out in East Knoxville, you've got Greenheck that is getting ready to build. They just bought 300 acres in the industrial park. They're opening their second manufacturing plant, going to employ 1,500 people. Amazon just announced that they're hoping to open the Amazon facility where the old Easttown Mall used to be. That's supposed to employ about almost 1,000 people. So there's a lot of jobs coming to our area that's going to attract people, and it's just going to. We're going to see increases in everything.
Yeah, amplifies some of the. I mean, a lot of great things happen when people come, but they also bring some of that with them as well.
Yes.
We are in an area. Why do you think so many people want to move here?
Well, I'm biased because I was born and raised in East Tennessee, and honestly, I think it's the best place to live, work, and raise your family. It's why I decided to serve in the legislature for 4 years, because I really wanted to leave the community better than what I had been handed. And we had been handed a really great community. So what could we do to make sure that we were taking care of the next and 2 generations away? And you're nestled right here in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. You're within 8 hours of almost 70% of the entire U.S. population. You can be to Washington, D.C. in 8 hours. You can be to the beach in 8 hours. Yeah. So it's kind of a prime real estate. And honestly, we've seen Tennessee is just a very business-friendly state. So we've seen a lot of growth. Nashville, while we're expected to grow, Nashville's expected to grow by about 1 million people in that same time period. So the state of Tennessee is growing. When I served, we were at about 6.3 million residents. We're now over 7. So the state's already added 700,000 residents in the last decade. Again, I think it's just because of the climate that we have. I think people love the down home feeling. The fact that people still say hello. It's not cold. It's not disassociated. We don't have fences up around all of our developments and communities. We're a very open and loving community. So I think people just love the area for that reason.
Yeah, and then that's the part of I almost call that culture. That's a part of the culture that I don't want to see us lose. Like I definitely, as people move here, I love the idea of people. We often talk about food on this. I love the idea of some people coming and bringing some great restaurants or mom and pop type places where we could taste something. But just know that I would like to see you when you move here to start to do the things that you moved here for. Say hello to people, open the door for them, slow down a little bit. because if everybody moves here and they want to keep their fast-paced lifestyle, like if it frustrates them that it takes a minute to get off of the green light, then that's not keeping the way we've been doing things going. So yeah, it is interesting to see the growth.
Well, and you joke about that. I can tell just sitting at red lights who is from out of town, because the minute the light turns green does not mean you have to honk your horn.
Right.
We've seen the light, but what you don't understand about East Tennessee is we're making sure that somebody's not flying down the road that's going to T-bone us. So, just kind of give it a second, lay off the horn a little bit. That thing was intended to not just be blown at every whim of your being.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can definitely feel the vibe, and I just would like to see people who move here for the reasons they're attracted to it, to then realize, okay, so I can take a breath now. And I know that's hard to unwind some, but that's how it is here. As far as Knoxville's growth. Now I'll just talk to you because it's kind of taking an interesting turn here, but it's a sticking point for a lot of people who've been here for a while. I see it a lot here in the town of Farragut, where they're like, we don't really want any more developments. We don't want to see apartments. We don't want to see, these homes come in. But we need those, and that's the stance I've been taking. Is like, at the end of the day, number one, you can't tell a property owner he can't sell their property. Mm-hmm. Number two, it's needed. It's not just needed for people moving here. It's needed for people who already live here. You're talking about helping children be basically healthier, more productive adults. We would love for those people to stay here and add to the community. They have to have a place to live. And, being on the planning commission, do you see, from that side of the table, I'm sure you heard plenty of arguments, or you heard, that vibe coming like, hey, slow it down. What's your take on that?
We used to call people who were that didn't want things NIMBYs, not in my backyard.
Yep.
I have kind of renamed them to cave people, citizens against virtually everything, because they just don't want development. But what they don't understand is some of it is organic growth. I mean, if I look at Knoxville and what's happened, I'm thinking about my daughter who is starting college this fall, thinking about 4 years from now. When I grew up, Chickamauga Avenue over in downtown Knoxville, just north of Fulton High School, 10 years ago, you could have bought the house for about $70,000, $80,000. That house is now $230,000. Mm-hmm. We are quickly outpacing the next generation's ability to become homeowners. And what I believe that the danger of that is it starts to destroy and undermine the American dream. The American dream that you can own a piece of real estate. You can be safe and secure in your possessions. But if we're making permanent renters and we're allowing the Chinese companies to come in here and buy up the developments and they own that, and we're making permanent renters, we are slowly allowing the American dream to be destroyed.
Not to mention the amount of... So to be able to buy a home is one of the best wealth builders mm-hmm. that anybody can make. And if you've listened to some of my shows, I've said it a few times, but the home is a really cool financial tool from the standpoint we have the ability to use a 30-year mortgage. Okay. Now, a lot of people say, well, I don't want debt for 30 years, but here's where it's cool. So they don't have this in Canada. In Canada, they don't have a 30-year mortgage. So I think it's every 5 years or so, their mortgage is reset. All right. So yes, they've been struggling. We've been struggling with high interest rates. They've really been struggling, okay? So when you buy a home that you can afford today, you get a set payment for 30 years. Now, slight changes can happen, insurance, taxes, those kind of things. But as you live there, ideally, your income grows. you've kept your payment the same, your income grows, you now have a larger margin between your that amount. So you have more ability to save money, number one. Number two, you are paying down that debt, which is creating equity. On top of that, it's growing in value, which is creating even more equity. At the end of the day, if you stay in that house, 10 years or so, you've built up a nest egg to really propel your financial future. Meanwhile, the person who was renting that whole time, they may have gotten it, at that moment in time when you decided to buy, it may have been cheaper to rent. Fast forward 10 years, it's not cheaper to rent at all. And that person did not have the ability to save additional money or build equity in something they could sell. So that is such a huge tool for people. Like, we want to create wealth in this country. And if we can keep that going and keep a community, and that's what we want. We want community.
And
that's big.
And we're getting ready to see over the next. I hate to say that that generation's just going to be gone in 8 to 10 years, but over the next 8 to 10 years, we're going to see the greatest transfer of wealth in American history, from the older generation that has had that ability to really save and build up. It's going to be transferring to the next generation, and a lot of people are starting to look at how can we help our families without having a huge tax liability and things like that. And there are options, even through Childhelp, through other nonprofits, where you can do some prearranged donations to help your family with that tax liability, so that there's just not such a huge hit for them when that transfer does happen. So, I would recommend talk to your financial planner and figure out how you could really set that up. You can do what's called a qualified charitable contribution. So maybe you've got an IRA and it's getting ready to start paying out, but you're going to be paying money on that. Well, if you're not ready to take that income yet, you can actually donate that to a nonprofit organization, get the tax credit, and you don't take the tax liability to help you out. So there's a lot of things out there, transfer of stocks. A lot of people don't think about all of those pieces that go into, not only your wealth that you got now, what you're wanting to leave your kids, but how do you make sure you don't leave your kids with a huge tax bill as well?
So that's a great point. That's a great point. So definitely something to talk with your accountant about, as you set these things up for, the next, like you said, the next generation. So as we start to wrap this up, is there anything else that you would like to add about Childhelp or our region here in East Tennessee?
Again, what I want to say is, the Knoxville and greater Knoxville area is an incredibly giving area. Not only are we supported, but some of our sister nonprofits are very well supported in this community. Knoxville gives back. It has a big heart, and they give a lot. So just find a way of a nonprofit that you're very intrigued about and get involved. Again, everybody woke up with either time, talent, or treasure. How do you want to invest those today?
Awesome, man. I appreciate having you on, and I hope everybody, learned a little bit more about a great organization we have here. Obviously, if you know somebody, you've witnessed somebody who's been dealing with either neglect or abuse of any shape or form, report it. Reach out. Let Childhelp get involved and help these young people so that they can live more fulfilled lives in the future. Obviously, if you ever have any questions about real estate, give me a call. But if you guys have, if you have questions about anything in that realm, definitely reach out to Childhelp, because they are the professionals in that field, and making a big difference in our community. And we're thankful to have you. And I appreciate you being on the show.
Well, thank you, and thank Terry Joe as well for everything that the Knox Fox does for Childhelp. We could not do it without you all.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And signing off, we'll talk to you next time.